Welcome to Life's About Living. I'm Dr. Page, the best guy to see on the worst day of your life. And I have with me Cam Edwards. I think you're going to be very excited about what he has to say today. Cam is a podcaster. He's very involved in the Second Amendment Foundation. And so his podcast is Bearing Arms. Is that right? And it's Cam and Co. Cam and Company, and basically they talk about Second Amendment rights. And if any of you have been following the media, you know that that's a very hot topic right now. There's a lot of things going through Congress. But really, I wanted to kind of pick Cam's mind today. Cam, sorry to just start talking and not introduce you. How you doing, Cam?
You're good, Doctor. I am good. I appreciate the invite. And yes, bearingarms.com is the website. I'm the editor at bearingarms.com. Awesome. Bearing Arms Cam and Company is the podcast that we do every weekday, talking about the latest Second Amendment news and issues out there.
Awesome. So really what I want to do today is because I really feel like in the media so often, there's these little sound bites and no one ever really gets to really discuss, the why. There's an old saying, you lose your why, you lose your way. So I want to go back to, the Second Amendment itself. And the goal of the founding fathers when they wrote the Constitution, I really believe that there were some fundamental virtues that, went along with those rights, to own a gun and to carry a gun. This is the thought that people would be a virtuous people, would have a little common sense, And I really want you to talk a little bit about that, and even more so talk about, with every right, there comes a responsibility. And I think what we're seeing today, a lot of the problems are because people have kind of abdicated their responsibility as gun owners. So I want you to address that first. What do you think are the responsibilities of people owning guns in our country?
Well, I think that the responsibility that comes with exercising your Second Amendment right is the same responsibility that comes with, frankly, exercising every other civil right. You're correct in talking about the virtuous people that we were expected to be. And you could argue that there are many more unvirtuous people in the United States compared to where we were in 1791. There's certainly a lot more people. So even if the percentage is still the same, in terms of the raw numbers, sorry about that, we have a pretty good chunk of people virtuous. Now, I would argue that the way to address that is actually through education and training. And I would argue that the vast majority of legal gun owners are, in fact, safe and responsible. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in this country, going back decades, is the fact that in most of our major urban areas, there has been a culture that has made legal gun ownership taboo. Right. And it hasn't gotten rid of illegal gun ownership. But what it has done has really, I think, eradicated or made it very difficult for that culture of lawful gun ownership to take root. And so, where I live, look, we've got the 4-H shooting sports programs. Kids are learning gun safety from an early age. Right. But in places like Chicago, they're taking the JROTC out of the public schools. Right. There are no gun ranges in Chicago. Yeah.
I want you to address this because you realize when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution, everybody had a gun. I mean, everybody went out, they hunted, they hunted for their meat. I mean, it was something that, families taught, fathers taught this for their sons. There were no gun courses. I mean, this was taught something that was just kind of intrinsically taught with families. And it was a culture. And it's interesting. It seems like a lot of what we're facing right now is a clash of two different cultures. Even rural Texas is probably like rural Virginia where you live. Everybody has a gun. I have a gun. I have a shotgun. And can you address that a little bit? I mean, do you think that's just one of those things that is only going to get worse, or do you think?
I think it's something that we have the power to change. And so I think whether or not it gets worse or whether it gets better is entirely up to us. Right. Because this is a condition that I think that we have created. Right. And so I think the answer is to recognize whether you like guns or not, whether you're a gun owner or not. We live in a country in which we have a right to own a gun. We live in a country in which more than 100 million Americans currently exercise that right.
Right.
And we have over 400 million privately owned firearms in this country. So you can hate guns as much as you want, but you're not going to get rid of them. And so then the question becomes, well, what do you want people to know? And I think that's where you can actually start to find some common ground.
Well, what
between
do
folks
you
on the
want
left
people
and
to
folks
know
on the
about
right?
guns?
What's that?
What do you want people to know about guns?
Well, I want people to know how to be safe and responsible with them.
Right.
So that means that I want people to have access to a gun range, for example. If you don't have access to a range, you're not going to be as proficient as you need to be with that firearm. You can go through dry fire training exercises and things of that nature, but it's no substitute to actually being there on the firing line with a firearms instructor and learning that discipline firsthand.
Right.
But if you live in New York City, there are 5 ranges
Really?
in a city for 8 million people. In Chicago, there are 0 gun ranges. In Washington, D.C.,
why? So that's from
0
legislation? Is that why?
Yeah, because of these anti-gun attitudes that go back to the 1960s. And that's really when they started. Violent crime started rising around 1967, 1968. You had the assassination in 1968 of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy.
Right.
And Congress passed the Gun Control Act of 1968. And the mentality, I think, in many big cities from that point on was guns are bad. We got to get rid of them. Well, we've had that experiment now for over 50 years, and we have more guns in this country than we did back in 1968. So I would say that experiment has been a failure. Let's try something different.
But wouldn't you say, Cam, that it's the illegal use of guns that's the problem?
Yeah, absolutely.
Having trained in an urban trauma center, and trying to retire from the knife and gun club myself, a different kind of knife and gun club, if you know what I mean. It's amazing the number of young people that, in gangs and stuff that shoot each other up, and that they don't really have a concealed, gun license.
Right.
They probably haven't been trained, like you said, with knowledge to know how to know when to use a gun and even when not to use a gun.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's the other side of the equation, isn't it? If supply side gun control laws aren't the answer, well, what about reducing the demand for firearms, particularly among those who are most likely to misuse them? Right. And that, I got to tell you, we've seen some amazing things. Back in Boston, Massachusetts in the late 1990s, there was a program that was put in place, became known as Project Ceasefire. And it reduced the juvenile homicide rate by more than 50% in Boston.
Really?
Without a single new gun control law on the books, without a great deal of additional spending. It was a change in tactics.
Yeah.
And so you had members of the Boston Police Department. First, they identified, okay, who are the most dangerous gangs in our city? And then who are the most dangerous members of those gangs? And they focused on those individuals with sort of a two-pronged effort. They called them in because most of them were on parole or probation. So they had to go where their probation officer told them to go.
Right.
They sat down, and across from them, there were 2 groups of people. On the one hand, there was the police chief. There was the district attorney. There was the U.S. attorney. There was a representative from the ATF, from the DEA. On the other side, there were their parents, maybe their high school principal,
wow,
the pastor, community members. And the message from both of those groups of adults was the same. You will stop shooting, and we will help you if you will let us, and we'll make you if you don't. And so they offered exit programs. Look, we're going to help you get your GED. We're going to get you job training. We're going to, whatever you need to do to become a productive member of society, we love you and we want to help you get there.
Right.
But if you keep going down this road and you keep terrorizing our neighborhoods and you keep killing our babies, then we're going to take every single case that we can to federal court. We're not going to give you a plea bargain. You are going to go away for as long as we can possibly put you away, because we can't have you doing what you're doing. And since
Cam,
that,
just thinking about that, I remember Christmas Day, I was an intern in Houston, and we had 5 children that were killed in a drive-by shooting, And those were definitely not folks that had controlled, gun licenses. So it's a real challenge, and it's a culture. I really think a lot of this is a culture. I want you to tell us a little bit about, thinking about this thought that it's not necessarily the guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. It's people that shoot people, and there are a lot of people that say because of the evil in our society, we need government to round things up and to round things in. What kind of dangers do you see in that? Because we know at one point, there are a lot of evil people, a lot of bad people. What are your thoughts on that?
I think government is, in my opinion, government rarely makes things better. I have a friend who says government ruins nearly everything.
Yeah.
And you hit on something I think that's really important, that what we're talking about here is ultimately, when we're talking about public safety or reducing crime, we can talk about the economic consequences, the economic circumstances, the root causes, but ultimately somebody makes a decision to pull that trigger and to take an innocent life, or even to take the life of somebody they don't think is innocent, but somebody they've been beefing with, somebody who did not deserve to die. And I think that the government is a very, very poor tool to address the lack of morality.
Right.
I think, again, you go back to the local community. Do you want some bureaucrat in D.C. trying to reach a 16-year-old on the streets of Chicago and try to tell him why it's so important that he not rob some lady tonight?
Right.
Or do you want somebody who knows this young man, who can connect with this young man,
right,
who can have that conversation and explain to him, this is going to be bad for your victim, it's going to be bad for you, it's bad for all of us.